Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Rainmaker Stories. I have with me today Mahima Vashisht. Hi, Mahima.
Hi, Nishtha.
Uh,
Thanks for
so,
having me.
yeah, thank you so much. So, before I dive into your intro for my audience, I must say I was quite in awe of the kind of varied experience that you have. Starting with you being an IIM Bangalore alumna, a former civil servant, you've worked in the impact sector previously with World Bank and currently in your stint with UNICEF. And you're also a writer of Women in India, a newsletter which has a loyal readership of over 4,000 and which covers very topical topics when it comes to women sharing their very, candid and personal stories on varied topics ranging from the usual biases or, casual sexism, motherhood, pregnancy, juggling their careers, etc. So, would love to hear something from you about your journey and how did this all pan out? Is it all serendipity or looking back, you've connected some dots?
So yeah, it's been a roller coaster of a career. It's quite diverse and it's not very typical, and it's not something definitely that I had foreseen would happen when I started off my career, starting from engineering. And then, I mean, even the fact that I got into engineering was motivated mostly by my dislike for biology. I did take biology in the 11th and 12th standard, like a good middle class kid hedging all the bets that doctor bhi ban sakta hai, engineer ban sakta hai, ye ban sakta hai, wo ban sakta hai. Basically, in the 90s, I think those were the two main careers you could go for. If you were good in studies, those were the two options given to you. And so out of that, I by process of elimination, I ended up doing engineering. And I think most of my choices from there on have been like that. I've not known like a very long way forward, but I just at any point of time know what is the next step. I somehow have an idea of what I don't want to do, and often that illuminates what I do want to do or leaves it out by process of elimination. So that's basically been the funda behind all of these moves. Would you like me to take you through them, each one of them one by one?
So I would love you to actually double click on how after an MBA, usually that engineering plus MBA combination leads you into industries like investment banking or consulting. So how did
Right.
you lead your way into the being a civil servant, and then
Hmm.
double click on what conspired to start Womaning in India?
Okay, so after the engineering and MBA, I did want to go into one of those two again. The two fields offered to people who are good in studies are, one is become an investment banker and another is become a consultant, mostly. And I mean, in hindsight, there are so many other fields which are very creative, very fulfilling, that make great contribution to society. But again, in that, when you are in that space, and especially at an IIM, those are the two fields that are revered the most. Incidentally, I graduated from IIM Bangalore in 2009, and that was a so-called recession year. It was right after the subprime crisis of 2008, and so the markets were at an all-time low. Most of the investment banks that hired people had actually vanished from existence itself. So, I mean, so many of my batchmates had got pre-placement offers from many of these banks that overnight just didn't exist anymore. And that impacted our placements. And so there were far fewer of almost none of the banks and far fewer consulting companies also that came to hire when we were graduating. But that said, I think that worked out well for me because finance to mujhe samajh hi nahi aata tha. So I was very clear that I am not going to be a good banker. And so I wanted to go for consulting, and I ended up landing up at a boutique consulting firm in Bombay, which had, I think when I joined, there were 13 people who worked at the entire organization. And our client, because it's been spoken about publicly, I can share, was the biggest public sector bank of India, the State Bank of India. And so, I mean, it was a very small team catering to a huge client. So instantly we were pushed into the deep end because there was really no other option. A lot of my work involved travel to various parts of the country because we were doing pilot projects on how finance can help businesses radically transform their value chain and help remove bottlenecks from value chains of businesses, communities, instead of just being a add-on layer. So instead of, making calls and saying, madam, mutual fund le lo, invest insurance le lo, instead of that, what we said was that if you sell from keeping your client at the center, then you will not sell like this. You will not do push sales. What the bank will end up doing is making a true change to their value chain, to their lives. And so a lot of my work was going deeper into these communities. So I worked with some auto part manufacturers in Hosur. I worked with stone carvers in Konark, with some sari weavers in Nasik. So it was like a huge variety of communities that we had picked. And for an entire year, as part of that project, I was just traveling these small parts of the country and talking to these communities, finding out what are the things that they need to help their businesses or their livelihoods. And that kind of gave me an insight into how real India functions. And it became my motivation to write the UPSC exam for the civil services. So after 3 years in the private sector, I wrote the exam and luckily cleared it and got into the Indian Information Service. Over there, I thought, I could make a difference because the information service is about public service communication, things like your Doordarshan News, All India Radio, all of it falls under that. That's the work that we did in that service. And so I thought that that was a positive way to make contribution, because making people aware of their rights, what is owed to them by the constitution, by various laws, by various programs and flagship programs of the government, that's a worthy thing to do with my life. And so I joined the service, and I was there for another 3 years, after which I thought I would be better utilized working for these communities, or for the people but from outside the government system, because the hierarchy was, I was feeling a bit stifled in it. And so yeah, then I joined the development sector. I worked with Tata Trust, then World Bank, and now I work with UNICEF. And all through these roles, I have been working with the government and adding technical inputs, giving technical support to various government flagship programs. I've worked a lot in the WASH sector, that is water, sanitation, and hygiene. So I've been a advisor on the Swachh Bharat mission, and from 2016 to 19, when the Swachh Bharat mission was working in rural India, trying to make India open defecation free, I was working there as their communication advisor. And so it's been a very enriching journey. So professionally, those were the leaps that I took. And like I told you at the beginning, it was more from a process of elimination of knowing what I don't want to do that kind of led me to, okay, let's do what's left. And it's been a hit and trial method that's been going on so far, and it will continue to be like that, I imagine. Somewhere along the way, I do have felt strongly about gender from a very early age, even before words like feminism or gender equality even was part of our common parlance. I think at a very core level, I felt that there was an inequality and injustice here. And it was useful to have this vocabulary later come into our society and be able to give words to these vague feelings that you've had all along. And so and writing has been a passion since college days, where I used to work a lot in college magazines. I was the editor of some unofficial magazine, various technical societies and all. So I decided to marry those two passions, because those were two things that I really loved doing, and none of my work had actually been able to fulfill that need in me. And so that's where womaning in India came out of, because writing and gender equality, the two passions.
That's such
That's a short story, but a very long one, I guess.
Yeah. But that's a beautiful journey, Mahima. And the takeaway from that is, as you said, that at times, especially this is something that I've noticed in women around me. And we are a set of women who are, amongst the, let's say, the top percentile in India when it comes to in terms of resources, education, exposure. And
True.
despite that, at times I see so many peers around me, or the different conversations that even I have as a part of my book and I continue to have in different engagements, is they often struggle to make these choices freely. Like in your career, the beauty of it, the way I saw is, okay, you're very cool in saying that, okay, by method of elimination, I just moved from one thing to another. And it's not that in the process you held back your passions. Like if writing was your passion, you meshed it somewhere in between. And of course, for the purposes of my audience as well, like you're also like a professional and individual, of course, but you play the role of a wife and a mother as well. So you somewhere just played along in a way that no part of your personality is getting compromised in all of this journey, as it shouldn't be. Like it happens for most men in India, that they are able to continue with all paths parallelly. Then why not we as women can do it? And I can so relate to it. Like even I'm an MBA, and I followed that usual path of starting my career with investment banking. And somewhere down the line, okay, doing strategy bit a passion of mine from a young age. And then writing came along, and I too am a mother to a toddler. So I see like there's so many parallels, and I feel like stories like ours and stories of so many other working women who are doing so many things along with it, they really need talking around and sharing as many stories as possible, because then you feel like, oh wow, this is a relatable story out there. And
Yeah.
especially with yours, like there's a public sector stint, there's a private sector stint, there is like development sector, then you're into the writing bit of things as well. So I must say it's quite a fascinating journey all in all. So this leads me to the next question, Mahima. So all across this journey, because you've had so much exposure at so many different kind of institutions and how these different sectors operate, what were some of the common biases that you faced, and how did you quash them? And answer this question thinking of a young girl who's starting out her career, how this advice can be helpful for her.
Yeah, so first of all, I wouldn't say I've squashed them. There's many things that I've had to silently tolerate. There's many things that I didn't even notice at the time. And in hindsight, I realized that, oh, there was some gender angle at play there. And I think one thing that I would advise to young women starting off is, first of all, we question ourselves a lot. I think as women, we are just trained to constantly second guess ourselves, doubt ourselves. And this is a trap that I also fell into. Like I'm saying, many things in hindsight are now clear to me were gender biases. But in that moment when say you're being ignored in an office meeting, you tend to sit back and question, was I saying, what I saying nonsense? Was my point not worth being heard? Am I stupid? Am I too aggressive? Am I too abrasive? Do I talk too much? Do I talk too little? So you as and this happens to many people. And imposter syndrome is a very well documented phenomena in many accomplished people. But I think it happens way more to women, because almost every woman is trained from beginning, from the day she enters society, and often even at her own home, that she's trained to second guess herself, to question her own voice, and her right to have a voice. So that's one thing that I would advise to young women starting on off, is that don't question yourself too much. A little bit of healthy you shouldn't get complacent, of course, with your achievements. And it's you can get too aggressive, too abrasive, but it's not but when you start from a place of questioning yourself, it's usually not the right way to go. Maybe if somebody else has given you that direct feedback, it's useful to contemplate it, but often in your gut you do know when you are in the wrong, and when there's scope for improvement legitimate, and when it's just self-doubt which leads to nowhere. And that's quite harmful. That can basically, it just kills your voice even before you've had a voice. So that's one advice I would have for young women. Personally, I faced all the gamut of biases that are out there, I imagine, for most women. Like I said, not being heard in office meetings, being looked over for concrete projects or roles, because it's just assumed that a woman might not be able to handle it. Or when you speak, you are seen as, oh, she's too bossy. Or when a man speaks a lot, he's passionate, right? And when a woman speaks a lot, she's bossy. So being labeled with those negative labels for no fault of mine, for doing something that would be appreciated that in a man, things like that. I've had men tell me, oh, this job is good for women, that's why you're good at it. Or being expected to do the role of an office mom. I've written about all of these in Womaning, and this was a piece that's very close to my heart, that how, women are asked to order food for team lunch के you are, आप ladies हैं, you are better at this, आप अच्छा करेंगी, आप decide कीजिए order क्या होगा खाना. Or you organize the team party because women are great at bringing people together. Even when it's couched as a compliment, often it is a gender bias and a stereotype. And women are often saddled with these non-productive works, which are, nobody gives you a raise for organizing a great office party, right? So the thing that is being given a raise for, men are doing those things, and women are saddled with these non-productive activities. So all of this I've faced so far in my 15 years of working, and imagine I'll continue to face them as I go on, because none of them have been squashed from the face of the planet, and people like that continue to exist, and they will. So that's why my only advice to women is, there's nothing you can do about these people. Sometimes you can speak up. Sometimes there are situations where it's beyond a point, it's not possible to even speak up. Wherever you do have a channel, you have a boss who you can trust, or a mentor, or a colleague you trust well, definitely raise these points the best you can. But I also understand that often it's not possible to raise your voice in some situations. So my biggest advice is therefore that, don't doubt yourself. At least in your own heart, you should know when you're right, and you should have that conviction in you that that this is not me, this is them. This is this part of what they are saying about me or not saying about me, or giving to me or not giving to me. It's on them, it's not on me.
This was actually, Mahima, I remember I too complimented you on that piece, and I emailed this piece, the one on Office Mom. It resonated with me so well. And especially, I remember, I think I had just, this is after my book had come out. And I remember I quoted a study in the book which said that women executive directors, for instance, are paid 45% less than their male peers. So just imagine, and this is a report dated not very old, like a 2020 odd report. So just imagine that even today the pay disparity is so high when it
Yeah.
comes to even white collar jobs. And when I read this piece, it just connected there that often you're doing so much of unproductive, like not like the as you rightly said, the work which has nothing to do with your core job, or
Yeah.
which will not result into you getting those hikes or those promotion. For
Yeah.
instance, akin to organizing a office party or lunch is like just writing those meeting notes all the time, or
Mm.
organizing calendars despite EAs being there for the respective people. You are still doing that. I remember one of the conversations I have quoted in the book. This woman was heading one of the largest regions for a large company, and they were all like different regional heads were invited for a meeting by the chairperson. And he walks in, and the only woman in the room, and he tells her that okay, so you'll take the notes. And she was like, I'm the one who's going to be presenting, like I'm the one who gets most money for this company, yet
Yeah.
there is no recall of me by the chairperson. So just this goes to show that you're right, this pigeonholing or this pattern in which certain roles we are like, okay, the alpha achievers are this stereotypical image, and the rest is this. So women, sadly, they still continue to fall in the rest part of the things. And you're right, if there's a channel, speak up. But of course, we need to be smart enough to choose our battles. At the end of the day, you need to see what will actually drive results, and then speak up, rather than just troubling yourself in your personal and your professional life. So that's actually a very practical bit that you've shared, that know yourself, know in your heart what's right and what's wrong, and whatever is not in the right, then it's on them. rather than
Yeah.
you putting too much pressure on yourself. That's actually very bang on. So this gets me to talking about a little bit more on womaning in India, Mahima. So what was your vision when you started with it? Of course, you have a love for writing, but even I've read your newsletters, the way it's structured, like the content is brilliant, the way you have a good dose of humor, also the kind of topics that you're covering, yet you have a sense of humor there, and the all the personal stories that you quote while you're writing every piece. The amount of research I'm sure that goes into each piece must be humongous, and there must be a lot of background work that goes into writing this newsletter. So, A, what's your vision for it? And how have you scaled it over the years? Like how it started and where does it stand now? And where do you see it reaching, let's say, 5 years down the line?
Yeah, so I think the idea for women in India germinated from a lot of debate and arguments, basically. I would get into, because I was passionate about gender equality, obviously nobody likes a woman who talks about gender equality. So there would often be some well-meaning arguments and some serious debates also with people over the years. And one thing that I noticed was that if you if you share an opinion, mostly people who disagree with you will just say, I disagree with your opinion, and that's fair, right? Like everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Or even if you share statistics in today's world, there's, for every statistic there's three counter statistics. There's really no, very difficult to find what the actual unbiased truth is at times. And there are people who are way more qualified than me to do studies and surveys and to come up with those hard numbers and those peer reviewed journals publications. What I saw is that one thing that I was good at, and that genuinely moved the needle when it came to people who had different opinions from me, was stories. And how, if I told somebody that, I think women are saddled with office mom jobs, they would say, I think it's not the case. That's it. End of debate, right? Like, I think, you think, ulta hai, fine, we move on. There's nobody who's to say who's right. But when I say that this has personally happened to me, that one day I was asked to order cake for somebody's birthday, and there was a man sitting next to me, equally qualified to order cake. There is a PA in the office, very well suited to order cake, whose job description it is to do such work. But I was still told to do it, and I was told that, and once I did it, and the cake was good, and then I was told, this is now your job. Every office birthday, Mahima is so great at ordering cakes. This is going to be her job forever. And when I tell such a story, people don't really have a counter argument to that, because they're like, okay, now how do we say that this did not happen? Of course, she's talking from personal experience. And so that's when I saw that, that's the power of storytelling. And it's way more, also not just that it can't be denied, but also it's so much more compelling when it's a personal story of a experience of a person, and it's far more moving even than many statistics. So there's a Netflix documentary, Inside Bill's Brain, about Bill Gates, in which so Bill and Melinda Gates talk about Melinda and Bill Gates. They talk about malaria, and how they decided with the Gates Foundation to tackle malaria in Africa as a big problem on the planet. And they said how Bill Gates, when he saw the numbers of, these thousands of kids dying of malaria in Africa, he was for him, that was compelling enough to act on it. But for Melinda, when she went to Africa and she met a mother who had lost a child to malaria, for her that was far more moving than the statistic. Now, if you think about it, logically speaking, thousands of children dying is worse than one child dying. But most of us as human beings are wired to feel far more moved by meeting one person to whom it has personally happened, than to read about that number of thousands in a textbook, right? And so most of us are like Melinda. We're not like Bill. So that's another way where, the penny dropped for me, that stories are the way to go. At least for me, that's far more moving for me as a person. And so womaning is a lot of me in it. It's the humor is how I talk. The way I write is how I talk, how I would talk to a friend. It's very conscious that I have stayed away from very flowery language or, big English words to show off what a great English writer I am. That's not what I'm there for. So what I'm there for is to talk to you as a reader like I would talk to my friends. So that's the kind of language I use. I am personally a big Bollywood buff. I crack jokes when I talk to my friends. So that's all of that comes through, and it's very intentional. That's how I want to present the piece. Another reason for adding humor is because some of these stories are really heavy. They're very disturbing. Often they can really mess with your mental health. And I mean, even as a person who's writing it, sometimes I write a piece and it takes me a while to recover from it. Like the last piece, as we are recording this on 6th February, I think the last piece I've written is about a very personal experience with sexual assault. And since I've written that piece, it's been hard for me to get down to writing again. So it takes a toll on your mental health, and I don't want womaning in India to become a place where people come to be sad. I mean, once in a while, yes, there is a heavy piece, but usually I want it to be a happy place where people come for joy, at the same time to learn something more about the world. And that's the kind of positioning I always wanted. So all of it is very, very intentional.
And that's a beautiful positioning, Mahima. And you're doing as a reader myself, you're doing a bang on job with, and you're really delivering on what you intended to do with it. And that leads me to, so you mentioned about how these, so many women share these candid stories with you or their personal experiences. And you've written so many issues till now, right? So I wanted to ask you, have you seen any changes in the way women are carrying on themselves in terms of demanding like what's due to them in terms of support so that they can lead a fuller professional and a personal life? Like I often say this, we just we in trying to do it all, we really risk a burnout professionally, and we
Yeah.
are also affecting our health and our personal equations in parallel. Like most of the interviews I did for my book also, some of these very successful women from across fields, be it a lawyer, a CEO, a CMO, a philanthropist, a digital influencer, a sports person, everybody had that common thread wherein they said that you need to learn to when it comes to your personal ecosystem, delegate shamelessly, especially once you become a parent. You need to rely on the family around. If you can afford, have a help in place, like delegate that. And b, even the organizations that you are a part of, it's not just a woman's career for her to continue with her career uninterrupted, but the influencers around you need to play a role, like the leadership, your reporting manager, your peers, your juniors, your HR team, the policies that a company has. It all needs to come together to make a very gender neutral sort of an ecosystem where only performance and merit matter basically. So do you see that sort of an let's say assertiveness and awareness in the the women in India? Are they womaning in an assertive way now? Do you see that change somewhere?
Yeah, I don't think I can speak for all of India, but I can speak for my readers because
Yeah,
they
your
write to me
readers.
and they tell me, some of them are kind enough to send to me these stories of the ways in which my work has impacted them, and it's what keeps me going. um for example, in the personal sphere which you asked about, just today I got a message from a woman saying, the physical assault story that I wrote last week. She said that she's gone through something like that and she's not been able to share it with anyone, not even her partner. And she said that I thought about sending it to you, but I didn't have the courage to write it out because it's too disturbing. But then she said that the fact that you wrote your story and you shared it with so many people, and people were so supportive in response, as they are, people are kind mostly. And she said that that gave me a lot of strength and hope, and it somehow felt, I felt, in some way, some part of that trauma resolving. So something like to have a small effect like that also is, for me, it's like, mission accomplished. If I get one mail like that for a piece, it's, I've done my job and I've done it well. And thankfully for now I'm getting a lot of mails like that for many of the pieces. Another one is, a slightly funnier one is how I wrote about mental load, and how when you're in a marriage, often the man, when he wants a coffee, he goes, makes a coffee and has it. And when a woman wants a coffee, on the way to the kitchen, and I wrote it from my own perspective, how on the way from my table to my kitchen, I'll see 10 chores to be done around the house, make mental note of things, often add it to a to-do list or do it right away. And in the process, I'll forget the coffee that I was going to have. And after I wrote that piece, a couple of my readers started sending me photos of cups of coffee and chai which had gone cold, because same thing, they started having a tea or coffee, and then being women, they just got lost in the million things around the house that needed to be done, and they forgot about it. So just the fact that something that you write resonates with people and makes them conscious of, okay, I'm not prioritizing myself enough, maybe I need to ask my partner to step it up, or like you said, delegate to somebody else. I have also known a woman who's I mean, it's in a very difficult marriage where there is an abusive mother-in-law, there's a husband who doesn't understand or empathize, and she's been a regular reader for a very long time now. And recently she told me that she's spoken to her husband about, I need to either move out or move your mother out, or something has to give, because this is not working. It's not good for anybody's mental health. It's not good for the children that there's so much negativity in the house. And just the fact that she was able to speak up and draw a boundary line like that, I feel that's like huge. That and she, even if she credits 1% of it to a reading woman, which she does, and it's really kind of her to say that, and it's very, very heartening for me to hear. And when you talk about having it all, for because you said also such nice things about me and all the various careers I juggle, I do want to put it out there that I don't want to be the brand ambassador of having it all, because that's just an insane standard that's imposed only on women. Nobody asks a man, how do you have it all because you have 3 children and you are a CEO? Nobody asks a CEO, a male CEO, that question. But if a woman rises to any sort of position, immediately it's like, how are you managing it all, and who's looking after your kids? That question is never asked to men, and it's just unfair that women are expected to have it all or manage it all. Nobody can. It's no human can. And it's unfair to put that standard on women. And that's something I've very vocally spoken against repeatedly and written against also. So yes, 100% with you on sorry, 100% with you on the need to delegate more as much as possible, the need to ask your partner or other people in the family to step it up, and if you can afford to get help for things. Um, and finally, you asked about the workplace where other people need to play a role. There also, at least among my readers, I have seen some very heartening developments. One of my readers, he's a founder of his company, and he read the piece I wrote about the lack of women-friendly infrastructure at workplaces, like women's toilets, breastfeeding rooms, etc. And he read that piece and wrote to me that I'm going to on Monday, I'm going to my office and I'm ordering a sanitary pad vending machine for the ladies' toilet, because it never occurred to me to do that before I read it in your piece. There was another man who, when I wrote about maternity discrimination, which is a thing that when a woman is about to go on maternity leave or has had a baby or is going to come back from leave, there is a discrimination against her clearly, that, oh, she's about to go on a long leave, let's not give her projects, or she's just coming back from maternity leave, let's just not give her that promotion, or she won't be able to handle as much work, so let's not give her the great projects or work coming through. So things like that again, and of course pay parity being the most obvious and crass one out there. So I wrote about that, and one of my readers happens to be a CXO in a big IT firm, and he wrote to me that, after I read this, I became conscious that I have been in the boardroom when such conversations have happened about our women employees, and I have never spoken about it before because I didn't think of it as a problem. But now that you've written about it like this, I see that this is a problem, and I'll never let it happen again in my boardroom, at least. So yeah, these are some stories that spark some hope for the future.
Wow, this is actually great, Mahima, and especially the bit that you talked about. You're right, just that narrative of having it all. And at the end of the day, you're right. Like, it's just like, why do we always ask this question to a woman? And I feel that, even if it's asked, we shouldn't tiptoe around it. Like, okay, just be very proud of how you're really managing it, and say it with pride, like, just like behind every successful man there is a woman, I would say both behind and beside every successful woman there is that entire infrastructure of people who are helping her out. So it's like, everyone's journey, you just can't do it all alone. Like, for instance, I recall when you, and this is related to your point on the professional world as well. So for one of the interviews that I did in the book, this is a managing director from one of the global Fortune 500 companies, and she said, at times we don't realize it that let's say a man who's an MD, if he's doing his job at 100%, he's not doing anything at home at all in most of the cases.
Yeah.
While a woman who is an MD, she's also managing fort at home in some shape and form. So
Yeah.
to actually to have that real parity in the workplace, you need to bring forward the personal angle to individuals. It's not just, we are not just resources who are a part of an organization. These are humans, and they come with their lot of their, backstories and etc. as well. And especially in a country like India, where still the caregiving ecosystem is very unorganized. You still rely a lot on, let's say, your family, of course, or even the domestic help infrastructure is also very unorganized. So there is always some sort of firefighting which is happening. Oh, the nanny is not coming in today, or this happened, that happened. So you need to really give an out to people to share these stories in workplace, to really humanize these things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as individuals, we will always shy away from not talking about these struggles on how we are really making it happen when it comes to different spheres of our lives.
Yeah.
And when we share these stories, it's when we normalize it, that, yeah, this is not just my challenge, it is her challenge as well, it is his challenge as well. So I
Yeah.
think that's a very beautiful takeaway from that. And of course, the kind of change that you're creating in terms of just creating an awareness about these things is kudos. And if, as you rightly said, if it leads to right action, even in one company, even for that one individual, it's like job well done, and it has that butterfly effect. I would say, that one individual would then be instrumental in changing the life of some other person then. And
Yeah.
so thank you, Mahima, for sharing the journey so far, and how you're making the change, and what has transpired in all of this, and the kind of impact that you're creating. And this leads me to the last question, for the benefit of the audience who want to be storytellers, podcasters, or writers. How can they get started, and how can they stay relevant?
Okay, before I answer that question, there's one more thing that what you said after my last answer sparked in my mind is, there is a need to create space for stories at the workplace. Another thing that if there are any CXOs listening to this episode of Awakening the Rainmaker, there's another thing that I feel very strongly is probably the step one, if you ever want gender parity in our lifetimes, or maybe even our children's lifetimes, is paternity leave. In India, there is compulsory 6 months maternity leave mandated by the government. And sure, it works very well for women because we do need that time to recuperate from childbirth and to bond with the baby. The baby is really small, and all of those things. And I'm a big fan of our country for that, because we are way ahead of even countries like the US, where it's terrible for new mothers. That said, the fact that there is no matching paternity leave is a problem. It incentivizes the organization against women, because they think, oh, a woman has come, and I've seen this happen even during interviews. It's a newly married woman. The first thought is, when are you planning your first kid? Because if you're planning the next year, you are no good to us, right? Like, next candidate, please. So A, it biases in organizations against women, and B, it generates that is the germination of the inequality at home. Because for the first 6 months of the baby's life, the mother is around for the baby 24/7, even if she's a working mother, but the father is nowhere to be found. And in that, and after that, what happens is a spillover of that, right? Like, oh, you bonded so well with the baby, oh, mother's instinct and all those ridiculous notions that come out. It's not a mother's instinct, it's a primary caregiver's instinct. And if a man becomes the primary caregiver, he'll also have that instinct. But a man cannot become a primary caregiver unless you give the guy paternity leave. So I think that equal and mandatory paternity leave is like the first step towards having any hope for gender equality at home or at the workplace.
Just building on that, Mahima, that's so bang on. And you have so many organizations which have actually done so. But the point here is, you're right, equal, that is there. Like many organizations now have it equal, but it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
So even if you track the data, there are hardly any men who end up taking it. Because again, you know, flip side, they're part of the bias where their bosses are like, oh, we didn't need it. Why does he need it?
Yeah.
And oh, like what role does he have to play? Like a woman, we understand, but why him? So
Yeah.
you're right. Make it, maybe have a structure in place where you're having those, you know, maybe through a de-bias drive within the organization, that you de-bias these things so that people can make their choices more freely. Like if there is a policy which is already in place, then why not avail it? And you're right,
Yeah.
that caregiving, the disproportionate caregiving starts during that period. So I think this step can really correct it. So bang on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Answer your last question that you asked about fellow creators. I by the way should put it out there that I had the idea of womaning in India in my mind for like 5 years now. So I just sat in my mind for 2-3 years and I did nothing about it, even though I knew exactly how I wanted it to look. One thing that helped was I was imagining it like a book, and I don't know about people listening to this, but personally I am not a very self-disciplined person who will sit and put a deadline on myself and write for following that self-imposed deadline. I need an external deadline to function, and that's where it really helped that I did this writing course with the podcaster Amit Verma, and he gave I at the end of the course I asked him for advice on how do I go about my book. And he said, why is it a book? Why don't you just make it a newsletter, a weekly newsletter? And Substack was new at that time. And he said, this is this new platform, why don't you write on this and make it a weekly newsletter? Even there I was little like, fortnightly kar lete, monthly kar lete, who'll write every week? He said, you start weekly. If you can't maintain, then you can always change it. So then I started with that weekly newsletter, and that's how it became like a discipline for me to write every week, because now I know there is a deadline of Monday midnight that I have to publish by then, and so I better have something ready. And if I don't, then I spend significant amount of time on Sunday, and Monday is my like crazy crunch time when I'm sitting down interviewing people quickly, getting the stories vetted and putting it in a structure, all of it. So yeah, it helps. If you are also like me, not a very self-driven, self-disciplined person, then it helps to have an external deadline. And how to stay relevant, I don't think you should worry about staying relevant at all. I think you should worry about being true to yourself, because you know a lot of writers and creators out there come up with this question of what can I do that hasn't been done before? The answer is nothing. You can't do anything that hasn't been done before. Everything's been done before. And literally that's what the job of a creator or an artist is, that you are standing on the shoulders of people who came before you. And so every piece of art is inspired by some other piece that came before it. And nothing is truly 100% original. So if you're waiting to create a 100% original piece of content, you will be waiting forever. So just start with whatever feels true to you, because that's the only thing that's not been done before, is that you've not spoken before. So that's my advice. Just be honest, be who you are, and that go from there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful advice, Mahima. I hope the aspiring storytellers and writers in the audience, take away from that. So thank you so much, Mahima. I had a lovely time interacting with you.
Same
And
here, Ishta. Thank you
yeah,
so much for having me.
thank you so much. Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.